If you have your handy-dandy with you, for some of you, you will go on, I'm sticking with that name, but that's my name for it, I'm sticking to it. Today we are going to begin going through the book of James. Taking a look at what is there for us, what are the major themes of the book. And as you start, the best place to begin any book, I recommend go to the beginning of it. The beginning of a book is usually where the person who wrote it wants you to start. Any book written in a different format, I think, has been an abject failure and has not changed the way that we read books. But each book of the Bible, James no exception, there's a particular purpose of why it was written. There's something that the author of it wanted to communicate. And in that, I would have a double meaning to it, where you would suggest that each book will have the author, in this sense, James, who wrote the book, as well as God has something that he wants to communicate to us through it. So, what does James, who is he writing to? What's the point of him writing this letter, and how do we receive it? The best that we can tell from James is that he's writing to a church in a time that faces a difficult future. There's a lot of uncertainty that's coming for the church. There is a lot of kind of pressure from many sides for what the church is supposed to look like on culture that doesn't seem to really appreciate the church. A culture that kind of wants to form the church a little bit more into its own image, or at least something that seems a little bit safer. Shortly after this time and during this time, there was persecution to the church for some of their claims that were unpopular, that didn't fit into a cultural story. Part of the Christian claim was always hard for different people to take in. For the Roman Empire at the time, when we claim that Jesus is the king, that's a bit of a threat to Caesar. That's a challenge to their kingdom, and they tended not to be appreciative of that. For other people, they didn't like the claims of this man Jesus, that we would call out to Jesus, that we would be saved by Jesus when they had a different system. The fitting aspect of this is that no matter what age we seem to be in, there is always a relevance for what James is sharing then. That James shares to a culture shares to a church in a culture that is trying to have its pressure, trying to have its influence on the church. And for the church, we always have to navigate what that truly should look like. How do we be in a culture without being defined completely by the culture? How do we work, how do we live with people who are part of a culture in a Christian way, in demonstrating who God is, in showing love to our community and being part of it, without being completely defined by that culture to the point that the most important parts of ourselves could be taken away. So James writes to a church that in many ways I think we can identify with. The church is always facing a cultural pressure to conform to something else. There's always something that we could be out there. In the same sense that as individuals, each of us has pressure on us on what we should look like. And for each of us, we either choose to mold ourselves to that, or we have to choose to mold ourselves with something else. So in James, I believe that James's purpose in writing is for helping to navigate as the church, what is it supposed to look like to call yourself a Christian? What is it supposed to look like to call yourself a Christian when times are hard? What is it supposed to look like to call yourselves a Christian when times are good? In relationships, when things are unexpected? How do we navigate the daily questions of what it is to be a Christian? And James's introduction, I'll read for you before I get ahead of myself. So reading from James 1, verse 1 to 18. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. The brother in humble circumstances ought to take pride in his high position, but the one who is rich should take pride in his low position, because he will pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich man fades away even while he goes about his business. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, dear brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give birth to us through the word of truth, that we might be a first fruits of all he created. Father, we ask that as we look in your word, that you would be with us. That as you speak to us, that we would hear, and as we hear, that it would impact, it would change the way that we live, that we might seek after you, and that in you we might find true, authentic, and real life that we can live. We pray this in Jesus' name. I always find it odd at the beginning of James, and I can't escape it, it's never changed for as long as I've read it, that the first thing he starts into is that we should consider it a joy when we face trials. That's a fine howdy do. I mean, people don't usually start a conversation that way. But James jumps right into, consider it a joy when you face many trials of many kinds. And I think, well, James won't actually, he's never told me why he did it this way. But what I see for this is that this actually is part of facing a real reality, that in our lives, we will face trials. There's no existence in our lives where we are devoid of challenges, things going slightly different to our plans than we wanted to, sometimes things going horrendously against the plans that we might have had. But no matter how we approach life, problems, difficulties, trials always come. And it's never a matter of questioning if it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. I think the real question that always comes to us, and the first thing James addresses, is how do we respond to them? When the difficulties and trials come to us, well, I can tell you that I have a hard time with James's advice because it's not my natural tendency. I've never gotten bad news and, did the fist pump thing. I've never been excited to get something hard. I've never been excited to have someone tell me that a challenge was coming that I didn't anticipate. But James says that we should consider them pure joy. And I continue to struggle with that. And I think we're meant to continue to struggle with that because there's something that is hard about a trial. We've kind of put a negative connotation on them because it's usually things not going as we desire. But the reality of life is that no matter what, we all will continually face trials. We have continuing circumstances that come to us that we have to make a choice on them. Sometimes we have to push through them in difficult ways. And what James suggests, what I see him telling us, is that for a Christian, the response to a trial is one of the ways that we really demonstrate our relationship with God. How we are connected to God is going to inform how every trial is treated. If our first response to every trial is panic, fear, and this idea that, what if I won't get through this? It shows us pretty strongly that we have a very limited faith in anything that's going to sustain us. That our connection to God is not based off of Him being able to sustain us. It's not based off of Him caring deeply for us. It's not based off of Him being able to walk with us through difficulty. If our first reaction, and this is often my first reaction to bad news, is how am I going to handle this? And I think James is trying to be pretty helpful in pointing out to us that our initial response isn't a good one. Quite often we can't handle the trials that come to us. And it's not hard to see the responses that we have to trials. we all have a response to them because they do come. And whether we like it or not, what we do corresponds to that. And there's no shortage of ones that could have negative, neutral, or positive connotations to it. It's common enough that when our troubles come in the world, you could go out drinking until you forget about it. You could work until you forget about your troubles. You could work until they pass themselves. Or you could try to work harder, hoping that the extra money that you would make from working would help pay for it. You could dive into family, and you could lean on family for your support and your help. You could jump onto food, you could jump onto anger. We have many, many different crutches in all of these responses because we have to have some way that we respond to trials. Our actions always come out of a form of ourselves. James gives us a very early reminder here that when we lean on something for our difficulties, at some point they're not going to be able to hold it. If I lean on my family for too much of supporting my life, I will eventually break my family. If I lean too much on my ability to work, I will eventually either break myself, break work, or break relationships in that. Some that are easier, if I lean too much on alcohol to get over my problems, there's fairly obvious problems that come with that. And that's a systematic problem that we have in our society, is that we have many different addictions that we try to get over the difficulties in life. And James begins his book by telling us that when you go through life, the only thing that you can lean on to get through all of your trials, the only thing that won't break, is God. And I think that's actually a good way to start a book. It's a good way to begin on letting us know that through the difficulties of our life, not just through the good times, not just when we feel like everything is going well, that God walks with us, and God is actually willing and able to get us through those things, but only as we look more and more to Him. As James goes on to say, anyone who needs wisdom, anyone who needs help on going through their trials, we should ask God. But not as a double-minded person, not as one who is deep in doubt. And I was kind of poking through what does this doubt and double-mindedness look like? And the illustration that I came up with was, for one of the uncertainties of relationship, let's say you are looking to get married as a fairly important relationship in your life. But the other person, when you get married, you don't have as much control over that person as you might like. They're kind of another person, and they have this free will, and they get to make decisions, and that's really annoying. If you want, it's basically, your spouse is just an ongoing source of trial, isn't it? So the way that you get around that is, maybe instead of dating one person, I'm going to date 4. Because then I'm hedging my bets this way. Because if this one falls apart, then I got the other 3. And if one of those falls apart, then I got it. Now, how well do you think it actually works to try simultaneously dating 4 people just to try to make sure that one of them works? You lose all of them. And it's a bit of a stretched image, but I think that's very much what we see here is the suggestion that if we're holding God as that, well, I'll keep a Bible on my coffee table, and I'll pray occasionally, but I'm going to usually not actually follow anything I see in the Bible. I'm not going to really rely on God for what I need. Because what if He has some weird solution? And if you've gone through the Bible, God's solutions are always really weird. And I don't know if I want that in my life. So what if I just say that I want God, but I have something else? To me, that is double-mindedness. Where we would tell other people, we come to church and we talk about how we rely on God, but really at home I have what I really rely on there. And I would never bring that into church, because then there'd be this weird conflict. It'd be like going to the same restaurant with the same girl, or 2 girls that I'm dating, because you don't want them to meet, you need them to stay apart. But when James says that if we're double-minded like that, essentially it's saying that the more you keep God at arm's length, the more that you say that I'm not ready to trust God, I do not actually believe that He is who He says He is, I do not believe that he has good things for me, how much do you think God can really do in that? In fact, anything that God would give us that would be good, we would ruin with that. Because we would take it away, we would start to care more about what God has given us than we cared about God. And as soon as we start doing that, we lose our vision. We lose what we're truly leaning on. And we replace God, who cannot be broken by our trials, with something that will break. I think that's supposed to be offensive to us. Because I was kind of pondering through that, thinking, I do that. And no matter how hard I try to tell myself, no matter how much work I seem to put into this idea that I'm going to rely on God, I'm going to keep that relationship, the ongoing pressures and trials of life keep giving me this temptation to put something else back there as what I lean on. It keeps giving me some other solution that is going to get me through. When I face trials of many kinds, what is the first thing? What is it that I look to get me through? James puts that first because it's a pretty important question for us to ask. Because what we lean on to get us through life is ultimately what we're going to get at the end of life. Moving on then, James starts to talk of the circumstances that we have, that those who are rich should realize the low position they have, and those who are poor should realize their high position. Then he goes on after to say that for those who perseveres through their trials, through their struggles and temptations, there will be the crown of life. And that when we're tempted, that we should not say that it's God's fault, but our temptations come from within us. And I always read these as three very separate pieces. That the first one, and I always read, when I read humble circumstances or high position, the first thing I always thought to, that I locked onto, was this idea of wealth. But it stuck out to me a lot that in verse 9, he doesn't say the poor brother or the humble brother, but the one in humble circumstances. Going back to the concept of trials and the difficulties of life, again, all of us have them. Whether we are poor or rich, we have the trials of life. Kind of an ongoing thing. James gives the demonstration very quickly that if we rely on our wealth, then our wealth fades away. Our wealth and our life will fade away. It's pretty common to hear someone suggest life is shorter than we think it is. I think that's kind of been repeated enough that it's considered kind of conventional common knowledge and wisdom. To rely on our wealth is always tempting, it's always present, but it will fail us. So when James starts to talk of tempting and testing, this idea of when we're tempted, we shouldn't blame God, but we're tempted and tested by our own lives. And again, I think this goes back to the choice that when we have trials in our life, we have a choice of how we deal with them. We don't have a choice of whether or not we engage with trials. We don't have a choice of if they come at all or not. We just have the choice of what we do when they come. And James gives us the two alternatives here. We can pursue God, or we can pursue our desires. So our desires are always there. Our desires are always pretty loud. Our desires usually are pretty easy to satisfy, actually. I have a cheesecake in my fridge that somebody put there that speaks out to me all the time that I would love to go and eat the rest of that cheesecake in one sitting. It'd be an easy desire to go and feed. I often have a desire to go and watch TV for 16 hours of the day, and then I could go back to bed. In some sense, life would be pretty easy if I did that. We have a lot of desires that call out, that promise us these good things, that promise us that they will get us through, but are really, really weak at actually getting us through anything in life. TV has never solved any of my problems. I don't know if you have any circumstances of TV solving your problems, I'd love to hear it. Food has not really solved my problems. Most of the things that I desire don't tend to solve my problems. They tend to be a distraction from it. And if we choose to pursue all of those, if we choose to never face the trials, but always try to find a distraction in some way to sidestep, or just hope they'll go away on their own, we choose a meaningless life over and over again. We choose a life that we have no direction over. As James suggested, we choose to live in a blowing, turbulent sea, waves crashing each direction, and just going with them with no control, no direction, and no support over that. The very quick image that we get of that is that you're going to drown. It's kind of the reality of being tossed about in turbulent waters. To pursue our desires is to pursue our own death. Not a quick one usually, but a slow one that slowly bleeds out. Maybe this is on the cusp of overly nerdy, but in Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, there was reference of the idea of doing something of value. This idea to undertake some noble challenge. And that this great fear was that I could placate myself, I could do nothing, over and over, until not only have I not done what I wanted to do, but even my desire to do it has bled out of me. That sticks with me a lot, because usually my desires actually bleed out what I really want in life. If I sit down and watch TV, my desires start turning towards just watching TV, which I know is empty. If I eat a whole cheesecake, I tend to want a whole cheesecake the next day too. And you can usually get them if you want to do that with it. But how do we interact with this concept of tempting, of testing? The question of how do we want to respond to our trials? Our temptations, James says, are what grow within us. These desires that call out and say, I want to be gratified. Which I won't try to tell you what your own are, but I would assume that for each of us, when we think of the things within us that always want some satisfaction, one of the big ones lately would probably be our cell phones. How hard is it to keep our cell phone in a pocket for an entire sermon? And I'm the one preaching. These desires always want to jump out at us, and they want to tell us that they're the way that we get through things. So when James says that we can't blame God for our own temptations, our own desires, because God is not tempted by anything. So I thought through kind of the implication, what does it mean that God isn't tempted by anything? Does it mean that God just is too lazy to want anything? God's just, he's achieved some sort of Buddha-like status? But the idea is that God is completely satisfied within himself. That's very hard for me to understand as a concept, because I would probably never say that I'm fully satisfied within myself. I would have a hard time, I would be lying if I said that I lived in a perpetual state of being satisfied by surroundings. But the offer that comes with that, I think, is much deeper than God is not being tempted or the source of trial. But if God is satisfied in himself, God has created us in the image of himself. God has created us to be satisfied by himself. God finds no desire outside of himself. He finds nothing that pulls him in a direction away. In the same way that we partook of communion, of the bread, we said that the body and the blood of Christ. We don't live by just our desires, our hungers, our appetites, but we live by what God gives to us. I can't say that I live in a perpetual state of satisfaction, but I can say that the times that I am satisfied is when I'm with God. The times that I feel that I am fully relying, that I'm fully leaning on God to get me through the difficulties, through what comes up in my life. Not every trial and temptation is actually a difficulty. Some of them are just the business of daily life. But when I rely on God for those things, I'm amazed at the sense of satisfaction and peace that comes along with it, instead of the anxiety and the fears that tend to come along with life in every other way. I think ultimately, part of what allows God to make the offer for us that he will satisfy is his quality of character. his quality of his person, that when he says that he will satisfy, that he does. That when he says that we can trust him, that we can. And that he says when we find our fulfillment, when we find what life really means in him, that it is really there. Our testing all through the Bible, from some of the earliest chapters, was the question of, does God really want what's best for you? Does God really care about you? The answer through the whole Bible is almost, it's sad how often it is, I don't think he does. Ultimately, until Jesus, we don't see a character who actually fully gives in to that concept. And after Jesus, it's no one who says, now we do. Now we fully understand what God wants. Now we fully bow down to that. But instead we say, with Jesus, we understand more and more of that. With Jesus, God's goodness is not understood and pursued by us. It's delivered to us. And I think the trials of life, I think ultimately they show us who we are as well. I don't think it's a matter of God putting us in snow globes and shaking it just to see what we'll do. Our trials aren't a case of God being a cosmic bully or a cosmic sadist who enjoys seeing how we respond to hard things. Through the Bible, we see that our difficulty is our choice. That we told God we want to live in a world without you. When you tell God that you want to live in a world without its purpose and source, you're going to have hopelessness, you're going to have meaningless, you're going to have difficulty. And continually you see God coming and offering. You can still come back. You can still come and have what is good. But I think our trials, they show us who we are. So I can put myself up as best I can for who I want to show you that I am. And on most days, I could probably decide that this is who I want people to see me as, and this is who I'm going to act as. And the way that you really see who I am more is when something goes wrong. When you really see is often with when my kids start really pushing the buttons. You'll see me respond in a way that is a little bit more authentic of what's deeper inside of myself. Because I can put on this idea that I'm a really nice guy and you want to be my best friend and I'll buy you coffee and that all of my decisions are good and wise choices. I can put on a pretty good image. But I can't hide from myself what I see when I really look inside, though. I can't hide from myself what happens when my circumstances push me in a direction that I don't like. If you really want to see that, you'd have to go for a drive with me in a city, and then you would see, like, I don't know, maybe you'd call that the real Damon. I'm not good at driving in cities, because there's red lights and other people. You can ask my wife about that, but yeah. The question that comes then is do I want to be better than that? Do I actually think that it's worth me improving? Do I think that I can be improved? How do you improve on this? I sometimes think that I don't need to improve anymore. Usually that comes before me doing something really dumb. Or me saying something really dumb. Or me having my kids come and really push on something a little bit. But the question of, do I want to be better? Do I want to expose myself to something that makes me better? James says that the things that make us better are often our trials, our difficulties, and our circumstances. So those are the things that test us and develop us. Those are the things that kind of find out if you're actually ready for something. And testing for the purpose of pass-fail is a bit harsh. And I don't think that's what James is talking about. We've kind of gone away from the blacksmithing. But a lot of different trades have a concept of when you are building something, you have to temper it. If you're familiar with steel work, steel is made stronger by how hard it is refined. Refined means more heat, more hitting it with a hammer, but the metal is purified, made stronger, made more suitable for its purpose. If you had someone who didn't care and just kind of said, well, it looks okay, I'm not going to check it for cracks, I'm not going to see if there's any holes into it, let's just strap it onto a ship, and we'll send that ship sailing out into the ocean. It's a bad idea. Things need to be tested, things need to have some kind of standard push of, we want it to be like this. And the question for ourselves is, are we willing to test ourselves, to push on ourselves where there could be cracks? Or are we more concerned with maintaining the facade? Are we more concerned with, I like how people see me right now, and if people knew that there was some weak spot on me, that would make them think less of me. So instead of actually dealing with my weak spot, I'm going to cover it up. And again, that's the same thing that we are avoiding actually dealing with our life, or we are relying on something that cannot satisfy. If we want to be better, then the question that James asks us is that, do you trust that God wants you to be better? Do you trust that if God were to walk with you in hard circumstances, that it makes your life better? Do you trust that God actually wants good things for your life? Do you trust that God actually has an end for us that he says that he does? Because those are the kind of questions that really, to me, determine how I respond to what's difficult. Back to my initial response to difficulty is, how am I going to get through this? Where the desired response is, God will walk me through this. God will walk with me through this. Because James, I greatly appreciate James' honesty as well, that he doesn't say, when you have trials, you should pray, and if you're a good Christian, then your problems will go away. If they don't go away, it's because you're a bad Christian. That would be probably not worthy to put in the Bible. I'm amazed at how often, instead of the answer to prayer being the immediate removal of my difficulties, it's God's presence to get through the difficulties. And what James, as James concludes at the bottom, that every good gift, everything perfect comes from God. I think James calls us to look at, what do we think the good life is? If you think of the good life, different things will come to mind on that. The good life is often portrayed as you have enough money, you have lots of friends, you have power, you have position. You have these things and your life is good. The ironic part is people who achieve those things often say, no, my life isn't good, I want something different. So when we think of what the good life is, if we think of what we really want, because all of us want our lives to be good. If you don't want your life to be good, I am available for some counseling. All of us want good life. The question becomes, who defines it? Does Mark Zuckerberg tell you what a good life is? Does Facebook tell you what a good life is? Does Justin Trudeau tell you what the good life is? Do I get to tell you what the good life is? Why would you trust someone to define what the good life is for you? What James is calling us to is the Christian response to life is that the good life is found with God. The good life is not found in our possessions. Often the good life is actually found in joining in with the hurts and the sufferings of other people. The good life is not about me gathering up some amount of wealth and comfort. The good life is not about me being able to go on the amount of vacations that I might be able to go on. The good life is not about me winning the lottery. The good life is actually about our relationships. And James's most pointed beginning here is that if you expect your relationships to humans to sustain you, to be everything that you need, they're going to fail you. If I expect my wife to be the support, all the support that I need in life, that she's going to fulfill everything that I need, I will break our marriage. If I expect my family to be everything that I need in the world, I put expectations, I put my hopes, my dreams, and I put more on them than they can bear. But if we put our expectations, our hopes, our dreams, our our vision of what good life is on God, He never breaks. And as long as we choose to put our hopes, our dreams, our visions on God, then all of the other relationships are meant not to fulfill, not to sustain, not to give us what we need, but they become something that we pour out of ourselves. In our trials, we no longer become the victim, but we become help. In other people's trials, we no longer see those as that's theirs to carry and I'll help a little bit, but something that we walk alongside with people. James begins by asking us the question of what kind of life do you want? If you want a life that's defined by the world, is that too broad? If you want the life that looks like it's awesome on Facebook, you can have that. God has freely said, choose the life that you want. Whatever life you want is yours to pursue. The Christian call is not that you have to choose this one. It's that this is the only one that works. It's a bold claim. It's not meant to be a harsh claim. It's not a claim of me trying to get control over your life. I'm not saying that I need to have, you need to submit. I'm saying that when we look to God, when we truly are sustained by God, that frees us up in how we relate to everyone else. That frees us up to live our lives no longer in fear, no longer in this anticipation of not being able to handle it, not in this fear of crumbling, that when difficulty comes, it's no longer a matter of how will I get through this, but suddenly an expectation of how I walk through something, how this is making me into something, that this is making me into what God wants me to be. This is actually building me to the point where we can actually consider it a joy when we face our trials. When things go wrong, we don't have to think of how on earth do we survive, but how this is actually making us thrive. The good life is continually on offer for us, but only if we want it. And if we want it, we have to pursue it. Father, we thank you for your offer of good life. We thank you that you continue to pour down goodness on us, that you turn every circumstance to your glory. You turn every circumstance can be something that grows us, that draws us closer to who you want us to be. That as we define ourselves, as we receive our substance from you, that you give us more that we can pour out. That we become your people, that we become your reflection in our communities. Father, may we have that vision, may we have that hope. And as we see your good life, may we choose your good life. Pray in Jesus' name.